At its closest point, the distance between Australia and the Solomon Islands is just under 2,000 kilometres. Being so near is why Canberra is so worried about the deals the small Pacific nation is signing with China. It means the once inconceivable idea of a Chinese military base being built right on our doorstep is now a reality. But if you think that's concerning, consider this. Beijing is also cozying up to Papua New Guinea, a country of much greater strategic significance. And at its closest point, PNG is less than 5 kilometres from us. In the early light of day, Bamana War Cemetery in Papua New Guinea feels like a contradiction. The largest in the Pacific, it's a place of breathtaking beauty and unimaginable sadness. Meticulously maintained are the graves of more than 3,000 Australian soldiers who gave their lives to one of the most arduous campaigns of World War II. What's the overriding feeling for you when you come here?
Well, I get emotional. I think of how my grandfather served in that war. He may have known some of these men here.
For Gary Jufa, the governor of the province that takes in the Kokoda Track, this is a place steeped in solidarity and sacrifice.
Well, it symbolizes a moment in time when our people came together, Papua New Guineans and Australians, for a common cause to fight for what they felt was right.
Do you still feel that bond resonating today between Australia and PNG?
Oh, yes. Papua New Guinea has such a strong connection to Australia that I feel these connections will never be broken.
Right now, though, old bonds are being tested by a new struggle for dominance in the Pacific. On one side, an increasingly belligerent China. On the other, scrambling to catch up, the United States and its allies. Caught in the middle are Pacific Island nations with some tough decisions ahead.
Is there looming World War III, for instance? Are we going to have to choose? Is that what is around the corner?
Tonight, the growing danger on our doorstep.
It is a bit like whack-a-mole, and so sooner or later they're going to get a foothold.
How China is buying influence in the Pacific. Do you have any concerns that China has an ulterior motive here?
We all feel that they have an ulterior motive. Everybody feels that.
The high-stakes game that could reset the world order.
I think freedom is worth fighting for.
But you think freedom is under threat?
I do.
Just how far are our nearest neighbours willing to go? Can you give a wrought iron guarantee there will never be a Chinese military base, a Chinese naval base in your country? If you're making power plays in the Pacific, then Papua New Guinea is the jewel in the crown. By far the biggest economy, the biggest landmass, the biggest population. But what makes it so significant is its location. Strategically, it's perfect. Only 100 kilometres to mainland Australia on one side, and the other way, it's the gateway to Asia. Suddenly, this normally quiet part of the world has found itself at the very centre of a battle for superpower supremacy. The phrase you hear over and over in Papua New Guinea is friends to all, enemies to none. It's a way of saying when it comes to investment, all bets are on the table. And that's just the way Peter Kengamar likes it. Do you have a preferred business partner?
Right now, we come from a culture where we marry 3 or 4 wives. construct a road from Wailala.
Peter is project director and chief spruiker of a bold new vision for Papua New Guinea. I mean, it catches my eye, but there are fighter jets here.
Yeah, that's when we are modeling this, we are thinking into the future.
It's the kind of development that could hold significant dangers for Australia. Called the Kakori-Ihu Special Economic Zone, it's an ambitious $8 billion plan to carve a futuristic industrial city from virgin jungle, not far from Cape York. You're envisaging an airport,
Yes,
a huge industrial complex, manufacturing headquarters,
right.
naval base,
Yes,
military base.
yes,
I mean, this is a big dream,
yes.
but you think it'll be reality very soon.
It will be reality in the next 15 years. So we got to knock off bits and pieces starting now. And that's what we are doing now.
China has already invested more than $30 million in the project, and it's itching to get more involved. As it looks to establish a military foothold close to Australia, it's little wonder the project has raised alarm bells. I guess where this gets tricky is because your development contains a military base, a naval base.
Yes.
That's a precarious position to be in if you're looking at whether you go with China or Australia.
We are already getting support from China in the military. And they have opened the door already. You know, if they increase the amount of support they're giving in that space, in the military space, then they might pick up those two bases. So, yeah. That's why Australia's dropped off. China is inching way around, and I don't know what's going to happen.
What's your message to Australia?
If Australia wants to have some say in this, then today is the time for us to talk.
A lot of Australians are quite worried about the growing Chinese presence in your country. Do you understand their concerns?
I could appreciate their concern, but we know which boundaries to protect and which boundaries not to cross.
It's election time in Papua New Guinea, and Prime Minister James Marape has invited us to join him on a trip back to his hometown of Tari in the heart of the Highlands. In PNG, electioneering can be an unpredictable business. But today, the crowd is in good spirits. Like so much of Papua New Guinea, Tari is dirt poor. Here, geopolitical manoeuvring is just about the last thing on anyone's minds. Have you seen the plans for Kakori-Ihu?
I've cited, EU Special Economic Zone proposal.
Do you understand the concern in Australia when they see China funding a development like this? And the idea is to build a naval base and to build a military base.
It may be a plan and concept, but at the national level, we have not sanctioned a naval base and defense, as you are alluding to.
So can you give a guarantee there will be no military base at Kakori-Ihu?
If there's a military base to be built in Kikori area, it will be a PNG Defence Force military base. It will not be a foreign military base.
Would you allow China to build a military or naval base on your behalf?
On our behalf, on our funding, maybe yes, but Chinese military base, no.
But if it's Chinese technology and Chinese builders setting up a military base there, I mean...
No, that's...
it can get into a pretty grey zone.
That's a no-go zone for us.
What's really set Australian nerves on edge, of course, is the recent revelation of a secret security deal drawn up by neighbouring Solomon Islands and China, perhaps paving the way for a military base to be built closer to Brisbane than Brisbane is to Perth. But if the Prime Minister's worried about it, he's not letting on. You know, Solomon Islands, next country over from you. There is now potential that China could have a military base just a few hundred kilometres from your country. Does that concern you?
I have no knowledge of that proposal.
Well, I mean, they've signed an agreement saying that they could have military presence in the Solomon Islands.
I have no information on this. I have no information, to be honest.
Really?
Seriously.
It's the biggest story in the region. And you're saying you don't know about it? I mean, are you just trying to be diplomatic there?
No, to be honest, I have not seen it. I have not seen it.
With all due respect, some might suggest you're burying your head in the sand.
Not necessarily, not necessarily. I try my very best not to get into other nations' sovereign issues.
To the experts, the Solomon Islands deal is bad enough. But given its proximity to Australia, a Chinese military presence in PNG would be on another level of strategic threat entirely. If the Pacific were a monopoly board, it does feel a little bit like China sees PNG as Mayfair.
It's a nice way of putting it. That's probably right. Yes, I think if you're looking at the Pacific, I would actually be wanting to have the Papua New Guinea as my Mayfair and Solomon Islands as my Park Lane, right? And I put all my hotels on those two parts of the board for sure.
So they've already got Park Lane and they want the set.
Yeah, they're quite well positioned at the moment. If this is a game of Monopoly, you'd say they've got a head start on the rest of the field.
Veteran defence analyst Alan Dupont says China's intentions are very clear and it'll exploit every opportunity it can.
Their strategy is to draw the whole region, every single one of the Pacific Island countries, into the Chinese world and make them dependent on China. And when you have dependency, then you're basically going to give the person you're dependent on pretty much what they want because you don't have too many options.
There's an argument to say, the United States, Australia, they're not exactly altruistic when they go and help out in these smaller nations.
Yep.
So why shouldn't China be able to help and invest in developing nations too?
You have to remember that a lot of Chinese aid are loans. You have to pay them back. They're not grant aid. It's not like we've built this irrigation system for you and handing it over, which we tend to do in Australia. Chinese loans are sometimes quite restrictive and you have to pay them back. And then what happens is you get this debt trap diplomacy problem where small countries, recipients of Chinese loans, can't pay them back. So the Chinese say, OK, you can't pay it back, so how about you give us a bit of your real estate instead, a debt for equity swap. That's the deal. And then you suddenly find you've lost your sovereignty and you've got a little China somewhere in your country where locals are not allowed.
Debt trap diplomacy has already stung a number of countries, from Argentina to Zambia, Sri Lanka to Laos. But as you'll see, it's far from the only weapon in Beijing's growing arsenal.
Given the overall designs of China's plan here, I think Papua New Guinea and, frankly, all the nations in the Indo-Pacific are at risk.
If anyone has a handle on the growing challenges in our region, it's retired Admiral Philip Davidson. Until April last year, he was the commander of US forces in the Pacific. When you look at the situation in the Pacific right now, is China a threat?
Well, certainly they're using all elements of their national power, economic, diplomatic, and yes, military power, to change the status quo for Communist Party of China objectives.
So China comes in talking a friendly game, but you don't think that's what they're about?
They have ambition by the middle of this century to displace the international order and replace it with one of their own. And I think you only need to look at the closed and authoritarian society that Chairman Xi is leading there to understand what a threat that is to the free peoples of the Indo-Pacific.
Admiral Davidson has watched with alarm as China's influence in the Pacific has grown exponentially in lockstep with the expansion of its military. Just last month, with extraordinary fanfare, China launched its third aircraft carrier, the Fujian, its most sophisticated to date and seen as a rival to the very best of the US. cutting-edge addition to a rapidly expanding naval fleet.
At the turn of this century, just 22 years ago, it was just a few dozen ships. You know, that Navy now consists of hundreds of ships, and they're introducing modern capabilities, long-range anti-ship ballistic missiles aboard those ships. They're introducing nuclear power to their submarines, hypersonic missiles to their rocket forces. It goes on and on and on. These are really profound changes in the last 20 years when there was no manifest threat from its neighbors.
How real do you think the potential for conflict with China is?
Well, I think in the very nearest term, China would like to do this diplomatically and economically. I think that's why you're seeing such assertive moves across the Indo-Pacific. The Solomon Islands specifically, I think is of key concern to the United States and to Australia, and should be seen as one of the opening volleys in a competition with China, because China is trying to change the status quo.
Australia remains Papua New Guinea's largest development partner, but there is no doubt China is raising its profile here in dramatic style. Across the country, Chinese projects are sprouting like bamboo shoots. But PNG's Prime Minister James Marape is keen to highlight his country's close links to Australia.
It's quite an impressive parliament.
Yeah, well, one of Australia's gifts to us in the early 80s, and again, symbolic of our democracy, it depicts the entire nation still going strong, 46 years on.
But given the efforts being made here by Beijing, it's perhaps no surprise the last big foreign dignitary to visit was China's Foreign Minister, Wang Yi, on a failed bid to ram through a sweeping trade and security pact with Pacific Island nations.
There is big concern in Australia about this looming battle of the superpowers. Is there concern here?
We are really inconsequential to what happens with the big boys. And so for me, at the moment, my first interest comes in building my own country up to be economically sustainable country. So that has been my focus.
It sounds like money talks.
China is important to us, just as much as Australia is very important to us.
The critics say that China's tactic is almost a slow creep. You look at the South China Sea, it started off as fishing setups, and next thing you know, there's military bases there. And the suggestion is that that is their plan for your region too.
So far, no conversation with China has moved in the space of military relationship. And, look, in the bigger space, if something unfolds, then we'll be concerned. But at this point in time, I see no immediate need for concern in our region.
But to some experts, having an each-way bet is a dangerous game. The problem, according to defence analyst Alan Dupont, is that even seemingly straightforward developments can have ulterior uses.
Is the Chinese equation pretty simple? Investment equals influence?
Yeah, I think it's a bit more than that. Investment obviously does get you influence anywhere, but China's also thinking from a military point of view. If we establish a presence and a relationship with a small Pacific Island country, maybe we could parlay that into military capability too. If you're building a road or a railroad or a port or an airfield, why not make it militarily capable? Let's make it the airfield long enough to take a bomber. Let's have the harbour development able to take naval ships. All you need to do is just make it a bit bigger and stronger, and then you've got that capacity. Now, you may not be able to use it initially, but it's there as an opportunity for you down the track. So that's the Chinese approach, and they think a long way ahead on these things.
You look at these investments, I guess, in isolation as a project for development here. There's, another port facility being built there. On their own, I guess they seem okay, but you think it adds up to a much bigger picture?
Yes, it does. So that's why we have a contest, and it's a very important one, and we need to make sure we don't lose it.
So just how do we make sure we keep ahead of the game?
Is there a sense of scrambling, a sense of urgency to make sure you get ahead of this issue before things get out of hand?
I wouldn't describe it as scrambling. I would describe it as urgency.
We've come to Manus Island to see an Australian win in the competition for influence in Papua New Guinea. A place infamous for being the site of Australia's offshore detention centre, this laid-back slice of paradise is one of the most important strategic prizes in the whole of the Pacific. The reason is this: the Lombrum Naval Base.
It was the springboard for the Allies pushing back against Japan in the Second World War. So at the peak, that harbour was as important to the Americans in Australia as Pearl Harbor.
A vital naval base in the Pacific is Manus Island in the Admiralty Group, which commands the approaches to Papua and New Guinea.
At its peak, the base housed 37,000 military personnel, making Manus one of the most important staging posts of World War II. Defence analyst Alan Dupont views the strategically located deep port here just as important now as it was then.
If you have a military presence there, you can project power out from Manus Island, not only into the South Pacific, but into the South China Sea. Also, if you wanted to attack Australia, it'd be the perfect place to attack Australia from, if you just turn it around.
We're talking strategy here, but as soon as people start hearing, hang on, attack Australia? I mean, is that something that is on the cards in the years to come?
If China thinks that Australia is going to join with the United States and Japan to support Taiwan in a war they feel they must win, they will target Australia militarily. All right? Now, the problem for China at the moment is most of their missiles don't have the range to reach continental Australia. But if you get a base on a Manus Island, for example, and you can put some of your missiles there, that's a different proposition. Suddenly, the whole of Australia comes within range, and all our military facilities and so on.
A few years ago, when China was looking to invest in Lombrum, Australia recognised the danger, gazumping Beijing with a $175 million deal to upgrade the base, an agreement that allows Australian and US warships to dock here. China may have missed out on the Lombrum base, but it's getting a foothold elsewhere on Manus Island. 80k along the coast from here, Chinese contractors are beginning work on a new fishing operation, complete with a 140-metre long wharf. They've also revamped the nearby airport, installing a longer, military-capable runway. The worry is that one day, seemingly innocent projects will be used for more sinister purposes. And that's why in the battle for influence, every little win counts. Manus Island seems like the perfect case study of how this plays out in the Pacific, because Australia and the US scrambled to get control of that naval base, but then China is set up here and there instead.
It is a bit like whack-a-mole, so we might get a win there on Lombrum, but then the Chinese pop up somewhere else, in Suva or Kiribati or Solomon Islands. And so sooner or later they're going to get a foothold.
What's become abundantly clear is that the security of Australia could well hinge on the leaders of some of the tiniest and most impoverished nations on Earth.
I think we are facing the most challenging strategic circumstances since World War II. How we respond to that is the test of leadership.
For Australia's Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, it's been a frenetic first few weeks in the job, zigzagging her way across the Pacific in a reassuring diplomatic dance.
It's been a whirlwind couple of months for you.
Yeah, it was a fair bit to do. I thought it was really important that we sort of get out there with the energy and momentum of a new government, try and leverage that as best as possible and make sure we talk with and listen to the region. It's important for Australia to do that.
Right, guys, 3 cheers for Australia. Hip hip! Hip hip!
So what is the pitch that, you stump up in these countries and say, all right?
Well, I think the first pitch is we're family. We're part of the Pacific family. We are in the region. And the pitch is your security and your future prosperity is tied to ours.
Every analyst will tell you that China doesn't exactly play by the rules on a lot of these issues. How do you beat someone that doesn't play by the rules?
Well, my job as the Australian Foreign Minister is to try and utilise the tools we have to maximise Australia's influence and engagement with the region.
Charm offensive?
It's not just charm. I think it's, being authentic. And, I think demonstrating to the nations of the region, we get that our security is bound together. And no one can go it alone. The smaller and middle power nations, we have to work together. And we have to work together not just against, but for. And what we're working for, peace, security, prosperity.
In this battle for influence, Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister, James Marape, says his country can be trusted to make the right decisions.
It's nice to have two countries fighting for your affection, isn't it?
No, we've been relating with both countries since 1975. There's always space for both nations without compromising our core principles as a country.
Can you give a wrought iron guarantee there will never be a Chinese military base, a Chinese naval base in your country?
There'll never be.
The Solomon Islands gave similar commitments not that long ago, and history shows how that panned out. Hopefully, Papua New Guinea is truer to its word in years to come, as Australia's bonds in the Pacific are tested like never before.
Could you have ever envisaged that Papua New Guinea would find itself at the centre of the biggest geopolitical battle of our time?
Well, I'm certainly concerned, I feel personally that China is just moving around trying to put in place arrangements to feed its massive appetite for growth. That's what they're doing. But the way they're going about it is probably what is of grave concern to many nations, including us.
Strong wording, though. You're gravely concerned about what's happening.
Well, we are, because we want to ensure that we are not caught in the middle of a conflict that appears to be emerging, that's looming. Nobody wants to be in a conflict zone.
The worst case scenario is a worry for us all. But for Gary Jufa, the governor of Oro province, those shared bonds between Australia and its nearest neighbour still count for a lot.
That connection will always remain. But it can get stronger or weaker. And that all depends on how we manage our relationship going into the future.
All relationships get tested over time?
Absolutely. There is no perfect relationship,
Some break down?
Some break down. They are bitter divorces that take place sometimes. But I don't think this would happen with PNG in Australia. We're going to be together for a long time. There'll be ups and downs, but PNG and Australia are firmly connected.
Hello, I'm Tom Steinfort. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our Extra Minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au, as well as the 9Now app.